Hunayn and Ta'if. If you remember, we talked about the conversion of the single most famous poet. Who was he? The conversion of the most famous poet of all of Arabia. Kaab ibn Zuhair. Hassan was the poet of Medina. Kaab ibn Zuhair converted to Islam. Farazdaq did not convert to Islam. Correct? Farazdaq is, yes, what am I saying? Astaghfirullah. Big mistake. Farazdaq is Umawi. The one I'm thinking of is, who is the one in the north part of Arabia? I forgot the name now. Yes, Farazdaq is way after. The most famous poet alive at the time of the Prophet ﷺ is Kaab ibn Zuhair. Kaab ibn Zuhair. And after the battle of Hunayn, he accepted Islam. After a few weeks after that, he came to Medina and he accepted Islam. So this is not on the plains of Hunayn. We talked about his conversion story, and his poem is called Banat Su'ad, right? Su'ad appeared, and Su'ad is of course the female figure, right? This is a little bit of a deep point, and I hope it's not misunderstood, but it needs to be said briefly, and maybe in some fiqh discussion we can go more in detail into this. But what I wanted to say, pre-Arabic poetry had certain motifs and mannerisms and styles. And some of those motifs and mannerisms and styles are awkward, to say the least. For example, every famous Arab poem, pre-Islamic poem, always has a love story. Dare I say, every poem in our times is about love, right? Rap, music, what is it all about? Every single famous Arabic poem, by and large, right, has some type of, in fact, it's not even Arab poetry. What is poetry and drama and whatnot, except that usually there's some love things involved, correct? This is the reality of our human situation. And pre-Islamic poetry is no exception. I mean, what is the beginning of the mu'allaqat? Should I quiz our elder sheikh here? What's the first line of Imr al-Qais? First line of Ibn al-Qais. قفا نبكي من ذكرى حبيب ومنزلي, right? قفا نبكي من ذكرى. So let us stand here and weep, looking at the place where our beloved used to be. So he's weeping, looking at the tent and the walls that the Habib used to live in. Okay? The what? Yeah, so just looking at the ruins. Looking at the ruins, right? You remember your grade 12 poetry now coming back to you, huh? It's all coming back to you, right? It's like, so, and this is all of the mu'allaqat. Now why do I bring all of this up? Because in this poem of Banat Su'ad, the poem Banat Su'ad, I mean, remember Asif, I have to ask you, what's the most famous line in this poem? You in particular. The Muhannad, the Hindi, that's all I remember. What is it? It's just famous to some people. That's a very valid point. I would say it is the most famous line of the poem, but not because of the Muhannad. It's the first part. For us, we'll take the second part of the couplet, right? Yeah. Inna ar-rasula lanurun yustada'u bihi. Inna ar-rasula lanurun yustada'u bihi. Muhannadun min sufillahi maslulu. That the Prophet ﷺ is a light that people seek the light from, and he is the Indian sword, Muhannad. So Muhannad is the highest quality sword, the sword from Hind, Muhannad. And we talked about this and the pride that every Indian should feel now about the term Muhannad, of the swords of Allah. Now, why am I bringing all of this up? Because if you actually read this poem, as is typical, there are paragraphs about Su'ad and the love that this man basically has for Su'ad, right? Kaab has for Su'ad, and descriptions of the beauty of Su'ad. Now, this type of terminology we wouldn't think when we think about poetry of the Prophet ﷺ, correct? But Kaab is a brand new Muslim, and he's writing one of his most famous poems. In fact, this became his most famous poem, Banat Su'ad. Su'ad became visible. Su'ad is now gone from us. So he's talking about the pain and anguish of Su'ad. And there are lines in this poem that some of the more conservative Muslims that are ignorant of Arabic literature, which is I think the most of us conservative Muslims, would find problematic. You understand what I'm talking about? You have a love poem here, right? What am I trying to get at? SubhanAllah, there are styles and techniques and wasilas that are used. Sometimes there are things present in those wasilas that you don't necessarily like. Our Prophet did not correct him. Don't have this, delete that. He didn't correct, just let it be. It's not the time and place to do this, right? And this is a bit controversial because other poetry he did correct. Other poetry our Prophet did correct. When the poetry was incorrect, was kufr sometimes, right? Or too much of an exaggeration. So the poem in Sahih Bukhari that some young girls came to the Prophet on the day of Eid and they began playing the duff and singing and the banging the duff. And one of the lines of the poetry was وَفِينَا نَبِيٌّ يَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْغَدِ. We have a prophet who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Now that's going too far. That is a theological deviation. Our Prophet ﷺ said to these young girls, get rid of this line and the rest of it is fine. This hadith is in Bukhari, by the way, right? وَفِينَا نَبِيٌّ يَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْغَدِ. We have a prophet who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Now what am I saying here? It's problematic because I'm not going into detail what is and what is not allowed, and that really requires some fiqh discussion. All I'm saying is sometimes in some places you can't have 100% sanitized version. And we have to especially keep this in mind in the modern world that we live in. When things are being done, people are doing da'wah in ways, maybe I wouldn't do it. Maybe I wouldn't even approve of it. But they have their ways of doing da'wah. And there's going to be some issues that have problems in them. And again, this is not an open light for all types of da'wah. It's case by case basis, and there's going to be a difference of opinion. All I'm trying to say is bring highlight to is, if you read this poetry, I can guarantee you almost any conservative Muslim who has never studied classical Arabic poetry, as for those who have studied, they understand this is genre. They understand this is how classic Arabic poetry always has a woman, beautiful lady, descriptions, love. This is the way poetry works, right? But for most of us who have never studied that type of stuff, if you were to actually read this poem, then you realize our Prophet was being recited to him. We would just balk, oh my God, how is this even halal? Even though the poem is very famous because it eventually leads to the Prophet ﷺ and praising him. So you always begin with the love of poetry, you work your way to the subject matter. That's what Kaab did as well. And we conclude